Europe just crossed a line that Moscow never expected it to. Not with missiles, not with tanks, but with bridges. In October 2025, Germany and the United Kingdom quietly signed a €450 million contract for 88 million cubic meters amphibious bridging systems, a deal that on paper looks like a simple logistics upgrade. But in reality, it's a strategic earthquake shaking the foundations of Russia's defensive doctrine. These aren't ordinary military vehicles. The M3 is NATO's fastest amphibious bridge, capable of carrying 70-ton tanks across rivers in minutes. It turns natural barriers like the Vistula, the Oder, and the Neisse, the very rivers Russia once counted on for protection, into open highways for Western armor. For the first time, British and German engineers will operate as one unified amphibious force, under a single command station just 700 kilometers from the Russian border. It's not a coincidence. It's a message that says Europe can move, cross, and strike without waiting for Washington. For Russia, that's the nightmare. Because what began as a bridge deal has become the birth of Europe's independent military muscle, and a direct challenge to Moscow's control of the Eastern Front. It began quietly, a signature, a handshake, and a €450 million contract inked through ochre. But for Moscow, that single act echoed louder than any missile test. Germany and the United Kingdom had just reignited a military partnership that Europe hadn't seen in over 2 decades. A partnership designed not to defend borders but to cross them. The deal is straightforward on paper. 88 next-generation M3 Amphibious Bridging Systems jointly procured from General Dynamics European Land Systems, GDEOS. 56 will go to Germany, 36 to Britain. But beneath the bureaucratic surface lies a strategic revolution, one that obliterates a cornerstone of Russian military thinking. This is the resurrection of the Wide Wet Gap Crossing, WWGC program, first launched in the 1990s and dormant ever since. Back then, river crossings were treated as slow, risky operations that required overwhelming air superiority. In 2025, that logic is dead. With this contract, NATO's 2 biggest European militaries have rewritten the script. The obstacle that once stopped armies has become their pathway forward. For decades, Russia counted on Europe's rivers as its natural shield. The Vistula, the Oder, the Neisse, each one a liquid wall protecting Moscow's western frontier. Barriers that could delay NATO's armor for hours, even days. But the M3 doesn't just cross those rivers, it erases them from the map. The modernized M3S, derived from the Swedish variant, is a masterpiece of military engineering. It's not a static bridge. It's a machine that moves, assembles, and deploys itself in minutes. In combat mode, a single unit unfolds into a 13.3-meter ramp section. Linked with others, they form bridges over 100 meters long, strong enough to carry NATO's heaviest main battle tanks, and they do it in under 10 minutes. For perspective, during past exercises, British M3 operators crossed Poland's Droi River in 18 minutes. Their American counterparts, using older models, needed over an hour. That gap, 42 minutes, is the difference between initiative and annihilation in modern warfare. It's the moment when Russian defenses crumble before they can even reposition their artillery. The M3's tactical genius lies in its simplicity. Each vehicle drives like a truck, cruises like a boat, and locks together with others through hydraulic ramps to form instant bridges. In one moment, it's rolling through mud at 80 kilometers per hour. In the next, it's floating across a river carrying a 70-ton Leopard 2 tank. Its crew of 4 can deploy it in combat conditions without external cranes, pontoons, or support vehicles. That's not just mobility, that's freedom of movement, the holy grail of warfare. And freedom of movement is precisely what Russia fears most. When NATO commanders speak about the M3, they don't talk about equipment. They talk about tempo, about controlling time, because in modern combat, whoever moves first wins first. The M3 restores NATO's ability to move at will across the geography that once favored Moscow. The rivers of Eastern Europe, those wide, wet gaps that Soviet generals once relied on, have been transformed into NATO corridors. In other words, this isn't engineering, it's geopolitics on wheels. Germany and Britain aren't merely upgrading vehicles, they're building bridges that rewrite deterrence. Each M3 unit deployed to Germany's 130 Pioneer Battalion at Minden represents more than a capability. It's a signal, a declaration that Western Europe is done waiting for the United States to lead its mobility operations. From the Rhine to the Suwałki Gap, the message is unmistakable. Europe now possesses the tools to cross its own frontiers, swiftly, independently, and decisively. And for Russia, that changes everything. If you're enjoying this deep dive, please like the video and consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us bring more global insights. Now, back to the video. For over half a century, Europe's rivers were Russia's insurance policy. They divided, delayed, and defended, creating the wet gaps that Soviet war doctrine treated as immovable shields. The assumption was simple: even if NATO had superior air power, it could never move fast enough on the ground. Every bridge destroyed, every crossing delayed, gave Moscow time to regroup, rearm, and respond. That assumption just died. The M3 system has eliminated the natural pause in warfare. What used to take hours of logistical planning, coordination, and vulnerability now unfolds in minutes, executed with mechanical precision by crews trained to bridge and advance before an enemy can even react. This is the end of static warfare in Eastern Europe. At full capacity, 8 M3 units can assemble a 100-meter bridge in less than 10 minutes. No cranes, no heavy lift support. Each module drives into the river, deploys hydraulically, and connects in a synchronized chain. Within minutes, the crossing becomes operational, capable of bearing 70-ton main battle tanks like the Leopard 2A7 or the M1A2 Abrams. It's not simply the speed that matters, it's the sequence it disrupts. In Russia's doctrine, defense relies on predictable delays. NATO advances are expected to halt at rivers while engineers set up pontoons or await air clearance. Those windows, once lasting an hour or more, have vanished. NATO can now move armor across the same obstacle faster than Russian artillery can reposition or recalibrate targeting data. The Drau River exercise in Poland proved the point beyond theory. British engineers equipped with M3 systems crossed in 18 minutes flat, achieving full armored mobility on the opposite bank while US teams with older bridging vehicles were still preparing their first sections. In a real conflict, that kind of acceleration doesn't just change timelines, it rewrites the front line. Russia's bridging forces, by contrast, remain anchored in Cold War-era doctrine. Their PMP and TMM series pontoon systems rely on manual assembly, slower mechanical deployment, and extensive logistical protection. Each crossing requires fuel trucks, armored escorts, and vulnerable staging areas, all easy prey for NATO reconnaissance and drones. What used to be a deterrent has become a liability, fixed, predictable, and easy to destroy. When NATO's new amphibious units begin operating jointly in the 2030s, the time gap between a Russian retreat and a NATO pursuit will close to almost zero. The wet gap, once a defensive moat, becomes an open highway. For Moscow, this marks a strategic inversion. Time, once Russia's ally, now turns against it. Every river becomes a vulnerability. Every crossing point, a test of speed that Russia is no longer equipped to win. This is why the M3 doesn't simply enhance NATO mobility, it kills the geography that protects Russia. And in the next phase of conflict planning, that single shift changes everything: logistics, deterrence, and the very meaning of defense. The wet gap is dead. The battlefield just became seamless. The true shock to Moscow isn't in the hardware, it's in the flag flying over it. For the first time in modern European history, German and British soldiers are not merely coordinating, they're operating as one. At the heart of this transformation lies the 135th Amphibious Engineer Battalion, based in Minden, Germany, the only multinational amphibious engineering unit in NATO. Its composition is unique. British Royal Engineers and Germany's Bundeswehr pioneers sharing barracks, command structures, and even the same vehicles. The M3 contract doesn't just re-equip this unit, it cements it as Europe's first fully integrated combat engineering battalion. This isn't symbolic cooperation. This is joint warfare made tangible. Every exercise, every readiness cycle, every logistical drill, conducted under a unified framework. Command posts are bilingual. Maintenance facilities service both nations' vehicles interchangeably. It's not Germany supporting Britain or Britain assisting Germany, it's the fusion of two defense ecosystems that once operated on opposite sides of history. The foundation for this integration was laid in 2024 under the Trinity House Agreement, a defense pact that quietly rewrote post-war European defense norms. Signed in Portsmouth, the agreement committed both nations to shared logistics chains, synchronized deployment planning, and coordinated procurement. It was less a treaty and more a blueprint for European military sovereignty, an idea that has matured into hard steel with the M3 deal. Under the agreement, The 131st Battalion functions as a testbed for what European autonomy looks like within NATO. Instead of waiting for US leadership or transatlantic approval, the unit reports through a binational command that feeds directly into NATO's operational framework. That means missions can be greenlit jointly by Berlin and London, a model that bypasses Washington's traditional gatekeeping role in alliance operations. The implications are enormous. In practice, this means a single order can mobilize German and British M3s within hours, deploying as one coherent amphibious force. Their supply lines are integrated, their communication systems interoperable, and their battlefield procedures standardized. What began as cooperation has evolved into co-ownership of force projection. For decades, NATO's European members relied on American logistics to fill the gaps. US bridging units, US lift capacity, US combat engineering support. The 131st Battalion breaks that pattern. Europe now possesses an independent mechanism to cross, move, and reinforce without a single American vehicle in the convoy. It is, in every sense, the prototype of NATO's European pillar, an operational node that proves Europe can act, maneuver, and sustain itself without waiting for the Pentagon's green light. The symbolism hasn't gone unnoticed in Moscow. Russian analysts have described the battalion as a command cell of European sovereignty, a term that carries as much anxiety as it does accuracy. Because behind every M3 crossing lies a new reality. London and Berlin, once fractured by history and policy, now move as one strategic organism. This integration represents more than unity. It's a declaration of intent, a statement that Europe's awakening is being engineered not in Brussels or Washington, but in Minden, where German precision meets British adaptability under one flag. In other words, the bridge deal is not just a procurement milestone. It's the moment Europe stopped being coordinated and started being coherent. And for Russia, that coherence is terrifying, because it signals a continent that no longer depends on distance, doctrine, or America to defend itself. For generations, Russia's military doctrine was built on one sacred principle: depth. The vastness of Eastern Europe, the rivers that sliced through it, and the time they bought in battle were Moscow's greatest weapons. It was a geography designed to slow the invader, exhaust his logistics, and bleed his momentum before Russian counterattacks crushed him. That geography is now obsolete. The M3 doesn't just allow NATO to cross rivers, it annihilates the logic of defensive distance. The Vistula, the Neisse, the Oder, once symbols of natural protection, no longer serve as buffers. They're reduced to mere lines on a map, meaningless when a 70-ton tank can glide over them in minutes. For Russian strategists, that single change has detonated an entire defense model. The nightmare begins at the Suwalki Gap, that narrow 65-kilometer corridor connecting Poland to Lithuania, wedged between Belarus and Kaliningrad. For years, Moscow's planners saw it as NATO's Achilles heel. A choke point easily severed, isolating the Baltic states in hours. But with British and German M3 units stationed at Minden, that vulnerability now flips. Within hours of an alert, NATO could deploy its amphibious battalions eastward, bridging the Vistula, bypassing destroyed infrastructure and reinforcing the Baltics faster than Russian artillery can realign. What was once a narrow lifeline becomes a rapid access corridor. The bottleneck that Russia counted on to delay NATO reinforcements has become the shortest highway for Western armor. The numbers make the shift unmistakable. From Minden, a convoy of M3s can reach Poland's forward river crossings in less than 6 hours. Each bridge they build can carry continuous tank traffic across 100 meters of open water in under 10 minutes. Multiply that capability across Germany's 56 systems and Britain's 36, and you have an entire amphibious logistics grid that can reconfigure the battlefield overnight. This is what Russian commanders fear most: mobility faster than response. Artillery, Russia's traditional equalizer, depends on time and predictability. It thrives when enemy movements are constrained, when choke points slow advancement. The M3 strips that away. Once NATO armor can surge across obstacles at will, Russian artillery positions, already stretched thin along a 1,000-kilometer front, lose their rhythm. They can no longer pre-aim, pre-time, or preempt. Even worse, every new crossing forces Russia to defend multiple potential axes at once. The concept of layered defense, hold the first line, retreat to the second, collapses when the enemy can create a new front line anywhere there's water. Each river becomes a potential invasion point. Each crossing demands reinforcement, but Russia's ground forces, already drained by the war in Ukraine, can't defend them all. That's the silent pressure the M3 introduces, forcing Moscow to defend everything and protect nothing. It's a strategic chain reaction that erodes the very foundation of deterrence. NATO doesn't need more tanks or missiles to threaten Russia. It only needs to move what it already has, faster than Moscow can respond. This is why analysts in Brussels and Washington call the M3 program a mobility multiplier. It transforms static deterrence into fluid deterrence, a posture where power is defined not by range or firepower, but by freedom of movement. And here lies the quiet genius of the deal. It achieves escalation without aggression. There are no new divisions, no missile deployments, no provocation by headline standards. Yet the impact is greater than any single weapon purchase since the end of the Cold War. Because when NATO gains speed, Russia loses stability. The old defensive map is built around rivers, choke points, and assumptions of delay no longer exists. The M3 collapsed without firing a shot. This isn't escalation by firepower, it's escalation by mobility. And it may be the most dangerous kind of all. For the first time in 80 years, Europe is moving without a leash. The headlines barely captured it. Steadfast Dart 2025, a sprawling multinational exercise across Poland, Germany, and the Baltic states. No American commanders, no US logistics tail, no stars and stripes insignia in the briefing rooms. For the first time since NATO's creation, the war plan was written, coordinated, and executed entirely by Europeans. What began as an experiment is now a doctrine. From the Arctic to the Adriatic, a new power center is forming inside NATO, one that no longer asks for permission, only coordination. This is the rise of the European pillar. Its message is simple but revolutionary. Europe will no longer be a theater, it will be an actor. The shift didn't happen overnight. It was built piece by piece and in exercises, agreements, and quiet deals that escaped the public eye. In 2024, the Trinity House Agreement bound London and Berlin into a single amphibious engineering command, a move once thought politically impossible. Then came the Kensington Agreement, 2025, a pact that fused British, German, Dutch, and Nordic cyber operations into a joint defense web. Shared submarine patrols now scan the North Sea under a single European flag rotation. Precision strike research is co-funded by the same capitals that once competed for influence. And finally, the M3 Amphibious Bridge deal, the most tangible symbol yet of European autonomy. At face value, it's a procurement contract worth 450 million euros through Oder, but underneath, it's something far more profound. The first terrestrial complement to Europe's independent command structure. If cyber and submarine networks represent Europe's invisible shield, the M3 represents its visible stride, a machine that embodies physical sovereignty. Because bridges, unlike warplanes or missiles, aren't just weapons, they are metaphors. Each M3 deployed on European soil carries a political statement welded into its aluminum frame. Europe no longer waits for America to cross its rivers. Washington, of course, supports this new assertiveness, publicly. US officials call it burden sharing, strategic maturity, the strengthening of NATO's collective resilience. But behind closed doors, the tone is more cautious. For decades, NATO's tempo, the speed and direction of its actions, has been set by the Pentagon. Now that rhythm is shifting eastward, toward Berlin and London. It's not rebellion, it's independence. And that distinction matters. Europe isn't turning away from America, it's turning toward itself. The continent that once relied on US troops, US airlift, and US strategy is quietly mastering the machinery of self-defense. From the barracks of Minden to the shipyards of Portsmouth, from cyber bunkers in The Hague to airfields in Bavaria, a new chain of command is being written in European handwriting. Every bridge, every submarine patrol, every encrypted signal now says what no declaration ever dared to. Europe is learning to move on its own. The emotional undercurrent is impossible to ignore. For generations, European armies built under the shadow of occupation and dependence. Every strategic plan began with the same question: what will Washington do? Now, a new question replaces it. What can we do? Together. The bridge deal between Germany and the UK is not just military integration, it's psychological emancipation. It signals that Europe can build, deploy, and defend without waiting for the transatlantic nod. In Brussels, officials call it complementarity. In Washington, analysts call it dissentering. But in Moscow, it's called trouble. Because when Europe acts as one, geography loses its grip and deterrence stops being an American export. For the first time since 1945, Europe builds for itself, and it's building fast. Russia built its defense doctrine on geography, and that geography just became useless. For decades, the Kremlin believed rivers, marshes, and frozen plains would slow down any Western advance. Every map in Moscow's General Staff War Room was drawn with the same assumption: terrain equals time. The bigger the obstacle, the more time Russia would have to react, but time is exactly what it no longer has. The Ukraine war didn't just bleed Russian manpower, it gutted the very organs that made its army mobile. Bridging units, engineering corps, and logistics regiments, the invisible muscles of the military, were shredded in Donbass and Zaporizhzhia. By mid-2024, satellite data showed that nearly 60% of Russia's PMP and TMM bridging systems were either destroyed, cannibalized for spare parts, or abandoned under fire. Russia's vaunted maneuver warfare has decayed into a crawl. Armored columns that once prided themselves on deep operational reach are now dependent on improvised crossings, civilian pontoons, and half-repaired Soviet-era ferries. Every movement across water or soft terrain becomes a gamble. Meanwhile, NATO's M3 equipped battalions can deploy a 100-meter bridge in under 10 minutes. Russia's outdated TMM3M units need 5 times as long, under ideal conditions. The result is a battlefield imbalance that no missile or tank can correct. When NATO moves, it flows. When Russia moves, it stalls. Nowhere is this more visible than in the northwestern theater, stretching from the Arctic Circle to the Baltics. The region's rivers, the Pechora, the Dvina, the Neva, once served as natural barriers protecting Russia's flank. Today, those same rivers expose its weakness. NATO's amphibious engineering battalions, now standardized under the wide wet gap crossing, WWGC doctrine, can transform every obstacle into a launch pad. If Moscow once dictated where a battle could or couldn't happen, it's now NATO that decides when and where. Even Russia's Arctic Command, once the pride of its mobility force, has been reduced to a reactive posture. With sanctions choking spare parts and industrial decay spreading through the Ural factories, the production of new TMM bridging units has virtually frozen. Russian engineers now rely on recycled metal and improvised repairs to keep outdated vehicles running. The Kremlin's vast geography, once its armor, is turning into a logistical graveyard. The symbolic contrast couldn't be sharper. In Minden, German and British troops trained side by side, folding and deploying their M3s like clockwork, a mechanical ballet of precision and speed. In Bryansk, Russian engineers still drag rusty pontoons into rivers by hand, praying they hold the weight of a T-90. The M3 doesn't just outperform Russia's systems, it redefines the meaning of mobility. It converts nature from an obstacle into an ally. And in a theater as geographically complex as Eastern Europe, that's not a technical edge. It's a strategic revolution. Every kilometer of river that once guarded Russia is now a potential breach point. The Vistula, Neisse, Oder barrier, long seen as NATO's logistical nightmare, can now be crossed in hours. The Suwalki Gap, Moscow's favorite choke point, can be reinforced before Russian artillery even finishes calibrating its aim. In effect, Russia's defensive geography, the centuries-old reliance on distance, rivers, and mud, is gone. What remains is an overstretched force, fragmented by loss, cornered by modernization gaps, and surrounded by neighbors that have learned to move faster, think jointly, and strike without delay. The Russian army still has firepower, but its mobility advantage is dead. And in modern warfare, when you lose mobility, you lose the map. The Kremlin can still talk about red lines, but it can no longer draw them on the ground because NATO's bridges have already crossed them. The next great transformation of European battlefields won't be decided by heavier guns. It will be decided at the waterline. Welcome to rapid crossing warfare, a form of conflict where rivers are no longer obstacles to be respected, but seams to be exploited. The M3 is the physical enabler, but the new battlefield is digital, distributed, and lethal in ways that were science fiction a decade ago. At its heart is AI-driven logistics. Gone are the days when engineers waited for paper orders and slow reconnaissance. Predictive algorithms now map the fastest, safest crossing points in real time, ingesting satellite imagery, drone feeds, hydrographic data, and enemy telemetry. An AI planner will route M3 convoys to a crossing, sequence the modules, pre-position fuel and ammunition, and coordinate counter-drone screens, all before the first turret turns. What used to be a laborious staff exercise becomes an automated burst of precision planning that buys minutes and saves lives. Drones are the glue that holds the maneuver together. Small quadcopters and medium-endurance loiters feed overhead pictures and thermal tracks. Kamikaze loitering munitions hunt artillery that tries to zero in on a bridge site. Logistic taxis shuttle spare parts and batteries between nodes, while swarms lay down smoke and electronic interference to mask the real crossing. The bridge itself is defended not just by infantry and air cover, but by a layered tapestry of unmanned systems and electronic warfare. An invisible shield that moves with the pontoons. That integration rewrites doctrine. NATO's emerging posture favors maneuver and interoperability over raw mass. Engineers are no longer secondary enablers, they are strike enablers at the tip of the spear. Doctrine now envisions rapid, multi-axis crossings synchronized with precision fires, cyber disruption of enemy sensors, and follow-on mechanized thrusts that exploit newly established corridors. Instead of attrition, the aim is tempo. Create a breach, widen it, and move laterally before an opponent can form a coherent response. Interoperability is the multiplier. M3 modules, allied pontoon types, command nets, and logistics chains are standardized to the point that a Danish, German, or British crew can hand over a live bridge in the same minute. When units from 6 nations plug into a shared digital backbone, the collective combat power is exponential, not additive. A coordinated European push can stitch multiple crossings into a continuous armored highway spanning hundreds of kilometers. Look forward to 2030. Conservative planners estimate that over 90% of NATO's expeditionary bridging capacity will be based on M3 type systems or fully interoperable descendants. That projection matters because it turns seasonal rivers and melting snowfields into permanent operational corridors. Reliable, repeatable, and defensible. Strategic maps will be redrawn to show lanes of movement as clearly as they show rail lines or ports. But technological advantage breeds countermeasures. Expect layered contestation, electronic attacks against navigation and comms, anti-access strikes on staging areas, and deception campaigns to force wasteful counter moves. The side that balances innovation with redundancy, hardened comms, and dispersed logistics will survive the first shocks. In the end, victory in this new age depends less on who can build the biggest tank and more on who can move the fastest, sustain the flow, and protect the seams. The river that once separated adversaries will become the route they use to reach each other. No longer a barrier, but a bridgehead for decisive action. The river that once divided East and West will now carry NATO across it. If you found this analysis valuable, please consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into geopolitics. We would love to hear your thoughts. Drop your comments below and let us know what you think. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.